So here we go again, Blue Origin being a topic of conversation on my channel, something that honestly I'm not terribly fond of. I really wish that I could have other things to talk about, but every new week it seems, or every month at the very least, something new comes out about these guys that ends up being a stark contrast to videos like this that claim to show progress, whereas really what we're looking at is a lot of empty warehouse space and launch facilities that don't have rockets, although they seem to be very well prepared for rockets. But as I've mentioned many times before, all they have to show for it is New Shepard, which would be completely inappropriate for a facility like this anyway. New Glenn, of course, being what is allegedly coming up for this facility that's going to catapult Blue Origin into true competition with SpaceX in particular. However, a plan has recently come to light thanks to the folks over at Ars Technica, and their article is linked in the description, that seems to indicate that Blue Origin really identified that their competition with SpaceX was going to be problematic at best. And this plan definitely indicates that the people over at Blue Origin are far from idiotic, and they clearly identified and recognized that their ability to compete with SpaceX and just about everybody else was not going to happen unless significant changes were made. And yet, as you're going to see fairly soon, Blue Origin failed to make any of these changes. They have fallen significantly short on just about every front except their ability to take people to court. What is wrong with Blue Origin's corporate culture? Why are they so unable to make the changes that are necessary to bring success to this company that is so well supported by one of the wealthiest people and most successful business people in human history, perhaps arguably the most successful guy in human history? How can there be such a massive disconnect between the success of this company's founders and their ability to compete? My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well. Corrupt contractors who are looking to take advantage of one of the most underfunded departments of the U.S. government and an unsustainable plan that is doomed to cancellation, as the Apollo project was. Something has to change. So it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. If this rocket was anything except a computer-generated image right now, Blue Origin would be a very formidable competitor, given that Starship has not flown yet and is not showing any indications that it's going to be carrying cargo to orbit anytime soon. The New Glenn would be crushing the competition. It has a 7-meter fairing. It can carry 45 metric tons to low Earth orbit and 13 metric tons to geostationary transfer orbit. far more than anybody else can do at the moment. Even though Falcon Heavy certainly has a great deal of capability, it does not have a fairing that comes anywhere close to competing with New Glenn. If New Glenn was a real thing, Blue Origin would be, as I said, a force to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, it isn't real, not even close to being real. And why is this happening? Well, according to one one of their executives in this particular report, it's a corporate culture of laziness. That's right, laziness. And this may indeed be the case. Blue Origin employees work 40-hour weeks like most people do, whereas SpaceX engineers, at least, work ridiculous hours. I've heard stories from Boca Chica talking about engineers being at Starbase at midnight and then Elon telling him to go back to the pad until 1, 2 in the morning. They have an incredible work ethic over at that company that really pushes their employees to the limit, whereas Blue Origin is anything but. Now, of course, does this mean that Blue Origin should be working their employees to death? No, but it could also be simply a case of not having enough employees. The recent and highly controversial message from former Blue Origin employees who worked on New Shepard claim that this entire project is woefully understaffed and overworked, as a matter of fact. They don't talk about a corporate culture of laziness at all. Instead, they talk about a corporate culture of being understaffed and overworked. This could indeed be the case, and if it is, then this is one of the biggest problems that Blue Origin could be facing at the moment. If they're working on one of the most ambitious rockets in human history, and let's face it, New Glenn really is, when you compare it to anything else that's currently in operation right now, then they unquestionably need a workforce and a talent pool to match the size of the project. And yet, it really doesn't appear that this is the case, given that New Shepard, which is a much smaller and less ambitious project, if you are to believe this letter from these former employees, is understaffed and frankly dangerous. As a matter of fact, given that Bill Shatner is going to be going up on the next flight of this thing, if there is a disaster that involves the death of one of the most well-known and beloved actors in history, this could be a dagger in Blue Origin's heart that they could not recover from. Why is this company putting themselves in such a state of jeopardy? And it gets worse. Blue Origin's executives in these particular notes that once again were uncovered by Ars Technica claim that the customer focus at Blue Origin is just fouled up in a huge way, viewing the customer as a nuisance as opposed to the focus of their operations. They claim that this is the case with their launch services agreement with the U.S. Space Force, satellite launch for New Glenn, and future passengers on New Shepard. Now, this is a common problem with many companies. What they're trying to do is force their customers into their model, their view of the future, instead of letting the customer control their mission. SpaceX actually does this to a degree as well. There's very little evidence to suggest that Starship and its 100-ton payload is really going to have any serious customers in the near future. There are very few customers that need to take 100 tons to low Earth orbit. However, SpaceX does a great deal to match the needs of their customers with most of their other products. Starship is just a small part of their overall operations, and this can be borne out by the fact that so many customers are embracing SpaceX technology. Falcon 9 is now becoming probably the most successful rocket being flown by any company at the moment. Atlas V cannot really compete with it anymore, which is why, of course, Vulcan Centaur is coming out. But by the time New Glenn actually makes its debut, is there really going to be a customer base that's going to embrace it? Will they really have the customers to support this type of rocket? Blue Origin years ago was concerned about this. Quote, SpaceX shifted the market to their payload capabilities and risk profile with their low-cost launches. Blue has pushed to exceed the market's current capabilities for size and mass. While this enables us to give our potential customers more design freedom, will they really try to design to a size or mass that makes our vehicle the only vehicle that can launch their payload? How confident are we that the market will design to our capabilities, unquote. This is a very, very serious concern, and yet Blue Origin doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. They're not designing, say, an in-between rocket designed to compete with Falcon 9. For example, a New Shepard capable of launching microsats or mini-sats to orbit, as I've suggested a number of times. It has the thrust to do it, but they're not working on anything like that. Instead, they're going to have a suite of rockets comprised of one rocket, the New Glenn, that can carry enormous payloads, and that's pretty much it. Is there going to be a customer base that can support this? Perhaps not, given how little the Falcon Heavy has been used up to this point. Now, there are going to be a lot of Falcon Heavy launches in the near future, but does that mean that New Glenn's going to have a lot of customers? Or does it mean that Falcon Heavy has already snapped up the customers that really could use that kind of payload capability? Another very serious problem that Blue Origin identified way back when these notes were first published, we're talking 2018-2019, was a matter of cost. Quote, "Cost is a design constraint, an important variable is embraced by their culture. Instead, that is talking about SpaceX, instead of being viewed as an evil metric that leads to a suboptimal outcome. Embracing this concept in our culture would lead to solutions that would be more competitive in the marketplace." And this philosophy still exists. That is the flawed philosophy of making cost a secondary consideration. And nowhere is this more obvious than the Blue Origin lunar lander. This thing is overpriced and frankly outdated when it comes to its concept. 2/3 of it, as I've said many times, being non-reusable. It's also dangerous and frankly just outdated. It lacks innovation, and yet it was priced incredibly high. Now granted, Dynetics was priced even higher, but they were using completely innovative technology with a 100% reusable lander in its final evolution by the time NASA rejected it, whereas this lander certainly does not live up to the price tag. And this fact was made even more apparent when Jeff Bezos, a day late and a dollar short, offered $2 billion to NASA as an incentive to embrace this lander in addition to the SpaceX Lunar Starship. If Jeff had $2 billion to reduce the cost to begin with, why wasn't this done on the front end? And by the time he made this offer, it was frankly too late. And this problem was clearly identified by Blue Origin staff before they even presented this flawed lander to NASA in the first place. Quote, "Trying to buy down costs through better manufacturing and purchasing alone will not get us transformational savings. We need to focus our energy on both designing and building with cost as a factor that rivals the importance of performance." And yet, in spite of the fact that this problem was clearly identified, Blue Origin and their partners presented this deeply flawed and overpriced solution to NASA and actually expected to win. So much so that they've continued to pursue the issue in court, and who knows, they may even win given how things happen in the American legal system. So really, even though these issues were clearly identified in the past, Blue Origin doesn't seem to have done anything to correct them. Is this something that's ever going to change? Well, the problem is Blue Origin has the money to keep going, limping along, in spite of the fact that they may lose one contract after another. Plus, they're getting awards from the government anyway, just so they can stay out of court, as I mentioned in a previous video. So this is a company that can keep plugging forward in spite of the fact that it has no business surviving in the competitive business world of private space flight. According to these memos, Blue Origin is also cursed with the problems that companies like Boeing have. That is to say, poor estimating when it comes to cost. And that's a problem that Boeing can survive simply because NASA has such a large history of doing business with them, but new and emerging companies like Blue Origin are expected to estimate their costs far more precisely. Quote, Blue is ridden with poor estimating. The estimates barely cover the spot cost buy of that material based on market price, let alone the entire part material purchase. How did SpaceX keep to their target cost? They probably did a good job estimating. That's a pretty obvious statement. How they accomplished such good estimating is beyond me right now, but they did it somehow for their early years, unquote. Now, one of the obvious ways that SpaceX has been able to keep their costs under control is by designing and building things in-house almost entirely. Now, this is something that Blue Origin was supposed to be doing as well, but they did not. One of the executives at Blue Origin said that their in-house fabrication was being used less than 50% of the time, and also Blue Origin had not hired enough machinists to work the shop. Again, a problem with Blue Origin not hiring enough personnel, enough of a talent pool to match what SpaceX does. This would help them keep their costs under control and allow them to compete. But once again, it does not appear that Blue Origin has done anything with these recommendations over the last 2 to 3 years. Instead, what they've done is continue to understaff their projects and sue everybody. Indeed, it would appear that Blue Origin is not very interested in hiring new talent anyway. Quote, SpaceX uses younger employees to great effect. Blue is extremely picky with our new intern and grad programs, accepting only 1.7% of applications. We could do better, taking on more young people faster, knowing we may increase churn. And churn has been a big problem for Blue Origin as of late, with many of their top executives performing what is pretty much an exodus from the company. They're losing what little talent that they have, and it's showing. Recommendations were also made to imitate the SpaceX policy of testing first and studying later, regardless of whether they blow up their equipment in the process. Quote, I believe we study a little too much and do too little. More test rather than more analysis will allow us to progress more quickly, iterate, and eventually succeed, unquote. Once again, a problem that was identified years ago, and yet Blue Origin seems to be doing very little to rectify the issue. And it's not that Blue Origin didn't know how to rectify the issue. Quote, develop a campaign that gets the public and industry on our side, much like SpaceX has done with their transparency and mission failure, which has been an effective customer relations tactic to get the industry, customers, and public behind them, rooting for their success, unquote. Have we seen anything like that? No, entirely the opposite. Blue Origin has not put their failures on display, nor have they been testing a lot in public, especially as far as New Glenn is concerned. Instead, they've been suing people over lost contracts and losing support of the public rather than securing it. How can they continue to keep making these mistakes? Well, I think all of these problems can be traced to one source. But before I reveal who this obvious individual is, let's go ahead and look at one thing that Blue Origin is doing that seems somewhat promising. This is Project Jarvis, the whole idea of making the second stage of New Glenn reusable, utilizing an aerospike engine that would also serve as a heat shield to re-enter the atmosphere. So they would reuse both stages of the New Glenn rocket, much as Starship Starship would be reused. Is this something that's going to prove competitive with Starship? Are they going to be able to develop it fast enough? And also, is it going to prove to be as practical as ULA's Centaur 5 second stage, which is also reusable, although not in the same way. Rather, it's designed to be reused in LEO and elsewhere rather than re-entering the atmosphere. Is Centaur 5, given that it's being worked on by ULA for years now, going to prove to be more effective and more relevant than Project Jarvis, given how long it takes Blue Origin to develop things? Well, unless all of these recommendations that were made years ago come to fruition at Blue Origin, I think that they're doomed, at least as far as being competitive is concerned, although they will continue to survive because of this guy. When it comes to the success or failure of a corporation or even a government, I believe that the buck stops with the person in charge. Jeff Bezos is responsible for all of Blue Origin's failures and everything that has been plaguing them since these recommendations have been made. Clearly, he has not taken these criticisms seriously, nor has he implemented any kind of significant changes to correct them. Instead, he's just using his vast wealth to continue to prop up Blue Origin, and also his vast legal team to force the US government to continue funding his company in spite of their problems. If he didn't have the kind of legal support that he does and the enormous wealth that he possesses, the government would not be hooking up his company with all of these contracts. They would not be helping Project Jarvis. They would not be funding this lunar lander. They would not be in danger of losing their contract that they have awarded to Lunar Starship in court. None of this would be possible if it wasn't for the vast wealth and power of one person. And this is very bad for the future of spaceflight in general. Because it's not just the future of Blue Origin that's at stake, it's also the future of ULA and their need for BE-4 engines. It's also the future of mankind's return to the moon and Artemis that's being held up in court by Blue Origin as they continue to insist that their high cost and outdated solutions are the best way to return to the moon when they clearly aren't. Until Blue Origin has the leadership that recognizes that these empty warehouses and limited progress over a period of 20 years, for God's sake, is simply not acceptable, and they need new solutions if they are to compete, and also to stop holding up everybody else in the process. Until they get new leadership to do this, the Blue Origin is going to continue to be a weight on the ankle of American progress in space and perhaps the rest of the world. Please like and subscribe, and also consider supporting this channel so I can keep this content coming. So until Blue Origin actually gets new and inspired leadership, or just closes their doors so we can get on with things, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.